Hey, this is Dr. Emily Scherding. I'm here with a little bit of a different type of video this week in case you're a person who's ever been interested in a career in climate resilience. We need a lot of people working on the ground if we're going to build the best future that we can. And there are a lot of ways to get involved that might not be intuitive and are definitely like not super easy to find if you're just searching on the internet or you're confused, you don't know how to start out. I didn't grow up in like a professional background, so I know that it can be hard to find points of accessibility for this kind of stuff. I want to help you out. So this is my main professional society, is the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. You can see it's not huge, right? There are only 2 to 4,000 people working in this field right now, but I want to show you they like need more of them. If you check out this website, the job board is kept updated very regularly. There's jobs all over the US and pretty decent remote jobs. And the pay is pretty good in this field. The standard for pay and benefits is pretty good. If you're a person who's looking for a new career or you're just starting out, you're wondering what kind of training you should get to do the work you want to do, this is a great resource to see what the qualifications are for these types of jobs. They also have a wonderful mentorship program at ASAP. I used it when I entered this field to get connected with people, to learn about cultural norms and practices, and I continue to use it for professional development. When I bring new consensus science information to this channel, a lot of the times it's from working with adaptation professionals across the country through ASAP. And in the rest of this video, I'm going to share something that is pretty near and dear to my heart, which is some of what I bring to the table to the adaptation and resilience fields, which is language use. If you're familiar with my work at all, you know that I am not a climate researcher. I try to be very transparent about that. What I study is language, science, and power. I was able to publish this book with Palgrave Macmillan, a respectable academic publisher. If you're interested in that or in any of the other texts of my publications, just email me and I'll get it to you. Like it is not, I like any decent scientist, what I want is for you to read the stuff, not to pay for the stuff because we're all a little self-sabotaging. But I am going to share this talk that I did with a small group in ASAP, one of my closest professional groups, so that I can talk a little bit with you about what I love and what I bring to the table, and so that I can share with you the reality that there are many people on a professional level working to learn how to communicate about climate better, that they really care, that they're working really hard to figure out how to get the message right, how to get resilience rolled out on the ground, and how to get everyone to the table so that we can get ready together. So here's the talk. All right, it's
Yep.
2023. Zoom is working. So thanks for joining me today. I know that we're all here because of our interest in rural communities. When I started working with rural communities in 2011, I called them that. I called them rural communities. But one of the first things I learned from my communities as I became embedded closer to 2012 was that many of them are annoyed by being called rural communities. That's one of the ways that they tell me they identify outsiders, is the use of that phrase. Many of my communities, they prefer to be called agricultural communities, which is why I titled the talk as I did. I don't have universal experience with rural America. You'll see the map later, the states where I've had a lot of opportunities to listen to people in these communities of our mutual interest. But I have been able to spend a fair amount of time on the ground learning from agricultural communities, from industrial communities, from communities that tell me they would prefer to define themselves as producing communities, producer communities, rather than like middle of nowhere communities. And I hope I can share some things from my professional journey that will interest you in this talk. Just a little bit about me. I'm a nonprofit leader with a background in science education research. My passion is increasing equity and access in science, understanding why people can't connect with science and finding ways to help them attach. I spent about 10 years researching how to use language in deliberate ways and crafted ways to help people learn science. I did IRB approved human subject research in children, college students, and the adult general population as I developed these techniques. I spent 3 years working with tens of thousands of people in primarily rural settings on climate from 2015 to 2018. My experiences have convinced me that there's enormous potential to build community support for climate resilience and communities that many people might consider challenging, such as those that lean conservative, agricultural, or religious. These are the populations on which I am currently focused in my climate resilience outreach through American Resiliency. But I want to tell you a little bit more about what I've learned so that maybe you can have some language tools that will help you as you work on communication challenges. And that story is going to start with words. We can start in 2011 when I published my dissertation researching the impact of plain language vocabulary on the retention of systemically disadvantaged undergraduate students. I was teaching at Arizona State University doing graduate work in microbiology, but I became very much more curious about the problems I encountered while teaching because I found I had become part of a system that systematically failed students of color, immigrants, other first generation college students like myself. I was failing them. They were failing my classes at the same enormously disproportionate rates they failed the other classes in the department. And I knew what my students had done to get into college, the barriers they had broken already. So I knew the problem was not, as I often heard other people say, that they were too stupid to be there, that they lacked skills. I mean, students from these groups, they tend to have incredible problem solving skills. It still makes me mad that any person could hold the simultaneous belief that a student is smart enough to bust out of Myanmar, but not smart enough to pass an introductory science course. I thought about this. There is some way that we are teaching wrong. Based on many student interviews, I decided to look at something we hold very dear institutionally in the sciences and study the impact of specialized scientific vocabulary on the acquisition of scientific concepts. In these studies, I demonstrated that reduced science vocabulary in lower level courses, 100 level college courses, not only improved science concept acquisition and outcomes in the course, but that reducing science vocabulary also increased student retention and scores into upper level courses. Reducing science vocabulary almost completely eliminated our demographically differential drop and failure rates, which at the time combined were about 70% in these populations. Arizona State University continued to use the curriculum for some time because these were much more intense effects than I had expected or that my colleagues had expected. And they were emotionally difficult for us to process as well. I mean, speaking personally, when I was a student, I was very attracted to the language of science. As a first generation college student from a working class background, I would say I had almost a totemistic attraction to the language of science. And it was hard for me to accept that the vocabulary of science was something that had such a negative impact on other learners. But most of us who do well in STEM, we're atypical learners, right? And that all made me want to explore learning more deeply. So I knew vocabulary was a big deal, but I wanted to know more. While I was doing my postdoc at the University of Iowa, I had the opportunity to further explore science, language, and power. I helped to manage this statewide random control trial where I led professional development for teachers learning to improve their science teaching. As part of that work, myself and several trained observers studied the ways the language use changed in both students and teachers over time and how it correlated with student achievement. So here you can see where my home range is on this slide here. So there were schools that I was visiting at least twice a month within this broad range out from Iowa City, which is where the University of Iowa is located. So like on a map of the world, this was a decent sized place where I was in contact with primarily rural communities. And sometimes I would come out as far as Des Moines or up to the border, the northern border there. And I would travel all around the state to meet with my other observers so that we could do inter-rater reliability exercises. It was really cool getting to know all of those communities over the course of this state. You know, I grew up in Chicagoland, you might be able to hear. So these were my first close experiences with what we call rural America. And I developed a very sincere appreciation for the different lifeways I observed in these communities over this embedded time, to the extent that now I live in one of these communities. But let's get back to business. Let's look at some outcomes here. So as I pooled the language observations from myself and the other observers over time, I discovered two separate discourse pathways that were really tied to student achievements. One of these was one by which the discourse of science, like engaging in dialogue, constructing arguments, how that is acquired, and one by which the skills of science, like actually being brave enough to do an experiment and learn from it, how those skills are acquired. Students' ability to engage in those discourse behaviors of science was learned by modeling, how we conventionally expect people to learn in the classroom. They do what the teacher does. But students' ability to engage in the skills and power behaviors of science, where we engage with the worldview building and application properties of science, they were best supported by a structural inversion, by power inversion. So there were specific teacher language behaviors that best supported student learning in the classroom. We, myself, and the other trained observers, making sure that many people were seeing the same thing. We studied 22 different language factors over those 2 years, and of them, I found 6 statistically significant language factors related by power constructs, and 3 statistically significant language factors related to dialogue acquisition. So first I'm going to show you the dialogue acquisition pattern, which makes kind of more sense with our expectations for learning, for teaching and learning. Teachers who engage in speech summarization, in frequent turn taking, and who had high fluidity dialogue in their classrooms, dialogue without hand raising, where people were just talking. So their students begin to do that as well with some lag. And if teachers experienced a drop in these behavior, if they decreased these behaviors, their students' frequency would drop as well. And this was very different from what I saw in the power acquisition behaviors. In a traditional classroom, we have an expectation that, say, to acquire vocabulary, the student learns it from modeling the teacher. My work, published in 2015 and is still being worked on in that home lab, demonstrated that vocabulary acquisition was best described by the power behavior pattern of structural inversion, where a decrease in teacher discipline vocabulary actually correlated with an increase in student discipline use of vocabulary words. Students would often acquire these words from outside sources, say from text, and then use them emergently as they uncovered concepts. We tend to think, of discipline-specific vocabulary as conveying meaningful content, but we have to think to new learners, which the general public is a new learner on climate resilience. Discipline-specific vocabulary is mainly used to signal who knows what's going on, who has power in the system. Anyone who has started a new job and run into a lot of new incomprehensible acronyms may be able to identify with that feeling personally. For many people, that feeling significantly impedes learning. It impedes our ability to acquire new concepts. The language factors where power inversion supports student learning in my study were tone and tempo of speech, vocabulary use, the use of honorifics and slang, and physical relaxation. Body language was really important. Students, particularly those who struggled in science, learned much better from teachers that were highly informal in their teaching style, who spoke quickly, who used high speech pitch, who had loose body language, very loose body language. Teachers who did not embody the power of science. Students acquired a sense of power around science more easily when power barriers were reduced rather than when power was modeled. So this was really far out. Like, I thought this was kind of cool. Like most people who excelled in their own science educations, it was interesting because it did not connect with how I learned, but it made a statistically very significant difference for most learners. When I started work in the nonprofit field in 2015, I wanted to apply this research to the public through my work with the National Center for Science Education. I worked on what we called socially controversial science, namely evolution and climate change, which was a more socially heated topic back in 2015 than it is now. When I started working with NCSE, they had recently done some survey work to find out why teachers were avoiding teaching these topics in schools, because they do avoid them. Even in states that mandate the teaching of both of these topics, only about a third of classrooms actually cover the material. And overwhelmingly, teachers said that this is related to a lack of perceived community support. So, we thought, why not see what happens if we can build community understanding and support for these concepts? What if we were to introduce them using these discourse pathways? And these methods, power inversion and dialogue support, they were extremely effective at increasing community knowledge, engagement, and action in the general public. I was able to publish on this in the Journal of Science Communication, We were able to measure increased knowledge using broad population level survey instruments. We saw rapid increases in event attendance. People began volunteering. They were giving money. They were giving in-kind services very quickly. You can see on the slide there, just from the first 2 years. So as the title of the talk, right, we saw in this experience increased knowledge, engagement, and action, particularly around climate. I can tell you people were very eager to get access to climate information that was informal and fun and met them where they were. I won more awards for my work in evolution. There's more institutional support for that, but climate is what the people wanted. In my experience, both power inversion and dialogue support techniques are crucial for engaging with the public on these issues. And this is where I did it. This is where I've spent time listening to communities on this. My work was done in primarily non-metro locations in Texas, Nebraska, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, and of course, Iowa, where the foundation of my work is. That's where I connected with communities during my postdoc. That's where I continue to be connected. That's where I work on the ground today. There's some cultural diversity in these states where these approaches have been tested. All across these sites, all across those states, we held many dozens of events connecting with tens of thousands of people. These were usually tabling events where you could do some hands-on science, and I can share activities if anyone's interested in those as like a community icebreaker. Sometimes they would be at like science festivals, but more often we'd be just where people were getting together. Congregational festivals, county fairs, places where you don't expect to see science out in the wild. And we experienced very low levels of pushback or conflict with the general public, although many people in professional circles were very concerned about what we might experience. I can recall only 2 occasions when volunteers called me that someone had been negative about the content at an event. One time it happened in Texas, one time in West Virginia. But on both occasions, the volunteers told me they were able to resolve these conflicts with redirection towards shared community values and by refusing to engage in a negative way, by insisting on maintaining a lot of relaxed body language and attitude and positivity. And I do a lot of volunteer training to support that. I'm going to talk more about volunteer training in a minute. So this work, just to show that, it was really building some stuff. I was able to publish a book that you can check out in most university libraries with Palgrave Macmillan detailing it. We won national and international awards. I was very proud of our team's work to get the Huxley Award. And this generated my first grant, valued at over $250,000 from the Ron J. Carver Charitable Trust. This work, it had a big impact, as is recognized by these outcomes, and it was absolutely critical. Scaling this work, getting it off the ground, was volunteer training and recruitment and retention. People can learn to engage in power inversion and dialogue support, but it requires modeling and a practice because it challenges many of our assumptions, particularly because most of us who exceed in the sciences benefited from structural advantages from growing up in homes that engaged in a lot of dialogue and dialogue support as part of our home language culture. But that's not how it is in all American homes. We know there are tremendous differences in the way English is used across social class and culture in America, to say nothing of the many discourse cultures and the multitude of other languages spoken by our target audiences. And saying that is not a value judgment, recognizing linguistic and discourse difference, I would argue, is a crucial step towards building equity in access to science. But back to the volunteer training. I find it's actually easier to train volunteers from non-science backgrounds. They need more content support, but it's more common for people from science backgrounds to have emotional struggles as they engage with the method, which requires them to give up many of the ways we physically project our authority as content experts. But I've been told by many volunteers with hard science backgrounds that the better they got at setting that gravitas aside, the more they were able to experience connecting with people around science. They had conversations they never expected to have. This experience of studied informality influenced them positively in ways that they did not expect. So I applied this background to my work with American Resiliency now. I focus on reaching rural audiences with a combination of in-person events and YouTube content, because that's where people are. Our work, it maintains distinctive style and tone, allowing it to penetrate into audience that are otherwise often cut off from climate information. I mean, we should all be aware at this point that most of the information we casually access online is algorithmically selected and reinforces messages we've already seen. We cannot assume that even though, of course, there's excellent climate information available for free online on great, reliable government websites, but people who need this information are not likely to see it. Unless you personally are maintaining multiple online personae, you may not have seen the type of content that's being reinforced in algorithmic patterns that are different from the ones you see when you go online. We reach about 3,000, I'm thinking about the quarterly numbers. It's only 1,000 unique viewers every month, new unique viewers right now, but those are numbers that add up. And I hear from people every week. I hear from multiple people who tell me that this is the first time that they learned any of this information through our YouTube channel. So it's cool. It's cool to be able to get to reach people, you know? I want to take a minute to acknowledge that my work today, as in my previous work, volunteers have been critical for scaling operations. That's true both online and on the ground. With help from volunteers, American Resiliency's total footprint, online and in person, we have a total audience of about 38,000 people in the last 18 months. Like I say, it's not big yet, but it continues to grow, and it couldn't be done without the volunteers. It's fantastic. So I'm sure this has some influence, some impact for you. Building knowledge, engagement, and action around climate resilience, it's crucial for our whole nation's future. That's why we're all here, you know? I hope learning about these linguistic tools is useful for your work. And I hope that learning about the sincere interest in these communities is useful and motivating for your work. You know, we have to acknowledge the general public does not possess the literacy or the numeracy required to read scientific reports. Often they don't possess the literacy or the numeracy required to read summary reports. But that doesn't mean they can't understand the content, and there's a tremendous interest in this type of knowledge. If we can reach people where they are, which at our time in our society, it's best done through oral communication, and I would, of course, argue oral communication using those two discourse pathways, dialogue support and power inversion. These are methods that reach people. And if we can reach people, we can mobilize a majority base of Americans who are invested in our shared future. So thank you for your time and attention. And please reach out to me if you want to talk further. I would love to hear about any communication challenges that you're facing and listen to what you're going through. And if I'm able to help, I'd love to try and help you. And that's it. And like I said, that's the end. I cut it off there because anytime that I'm sharing a talk that I give, I like to cut off the Q&A so that people can ask whatever questions they want without feeling dumb. And this, of course, is your opportunity. There are no dumb questions on this sort of thing that makes us have emotional responses, right? It's worth taking some time to walk through it. And thanks for joining me. And I will be back with more actually directly resilience related content. Thank you.